as far as in the classroom, he was considered very good. So I thought, well, I'll take him. So I went, and I was just amazed on the first day of class that he thinks so clearly and can think on so many levels at one time.
The first thing that struck me about him were his sentences. He speaks in complete sentences which he creates as he goes along, and they're always syntactically correct. They're just like great written sentences, and he makes them up as he goes along, and he edits while he talks.
Other professors often, when they teach a class, they're teaching you about literature, but Stephen Booth teaches you how to think about literature.
Well, he's the only teacher that I've had at Berkeley who's really who hasn't seemed like an addendum to things I already know, or this was the only class that was really central to my being or my thinking or my anything that really got deep inside of me that I've had at Berkeley.
He raises more questions than he knows how to answer, and he makes things problematic.
He's the only teacher that I've had who will write more comments on your paper than you wrote paper. He also writes in 5 different pens, which over the same paragraph, which I assume means that he read your paper 5 different times, and that the blue is the first reading, and the brown is the second reading, and the green is the third reading.
This is a sample of one of the comments he wrote, which he affixed to the end of my paper. It says, "My God, that's a subjunctive. Human beings don't talk like that. Only small-town newspapers talk like that. What kind of identity are you trying to fabricate for yourself?"
Well, I would say that I really was never lost. I have always been interested in insects as far back as I can remember. And I was interested in natural history from a very early age. Like 6 or 7 years old, I was collecting insects and interested in the world around me. And I had a sympathetic parents that put up with this and allowed me to collect things, keep them in my room, keep reptiles and amphibians and so forth. And I had a good biology teacher in high school who encouraged me also in the scientific aspects of biology. For a while I was really torn between studying reptiles and amphibians. It turns out that where I grew up, which was in Dallas, Texas, is an extremely rich area for reptiles and amphibians. But as I grew older, I decided that really entomology offered a great deal more in the way of employment. And that turned out to be right, that there are really more jobs in entomology than in the study of herpetology.
I think Dr. Daly is probably one of the finest teachers I've had at the university, and I say that without reservation. Some of it, of course, is his personality. He's a very friendly person. He also is extremely knowledgeable, has a very quick and sharp mind on entomology, all aspects of entomology, broad general knowledge, physiology, biological control, systematics, almost anything he knows something about.
My whole undergraduate education was one of a sort of one-on-one relationship between the teacher and the student. And it really has been hard for me to cope with the kind of class sizes I've had to deal with at Berkeley and the kind of impersonal relationships that I detect and that students complain about. It just doesn't seem at all like the university education that I had as a student, and I think that's too bad. It really is a missing element in teaching, and that's one of the things that I've tried to do in my classes is to try to know the students on an individual basis and to try to find out what problems they might be having and to try to help them to whatever extent that I can.
His enthusiasm for the subject comes across when he gives lectures, and he spends a great deal of time on his lectures so that they're very coherent and well organized. And he evaluates these things continuously from one year to the next and takes student evaluations very seriously.
I try to make the effort to appear to address each student individually, even though there may be 70 students in the audience. I try to look at the audience. I try to look at individual students as if I am talking directly to them. I think that this, plus the fact that I try to recognize as many questions from the student group as I can, try to identify them by name. If I know the student's name, I try to use it when I communicate with them. so that they get the feeling that it's not, 70 anonymous students in a classroom, but actually they have the opportunity to ask me questions that come to mind.
I went to college and majored in American Studies in some part because it allowed me to read lots of things and to avoid making substantive decisions about what my life was going to look like. I went to law school because I was nervous about earning a living being clever with my pen, and law school was the last refuge of generalists, and was working on issues of law and policy with no clear intention of what the future beyond law school would look like and law reform would look like, when the telephone rang one day and I was asked if I wanted to teach the public policy school at Berkeley. And now, for someone who thinks of policy as a natural, insane livelihood, my answer then has a funny ring. It was, what is public policy? Well, there was an extraordinary American history professor who, I suppose, in requiring that we turn the New York Times into daily reading, introduced me to public policy, and who, in his energy and sense of drama, gave me some feel for what teaching at its best could be about. An inspiring figure. If I were going to have my druthers, the great pleasure of teaching at a place like Berkeley is the range and diversity of students in a classroom. Unlike Harvard or for that matter Amherst, where there's a much narrower spectrum drawn on, it's very exciting to have a first-generation college student who spent a couple of years at community college and has just caught fire, sitting next to someone who, in traditional academic terms, is as able and adept as any in any institution in the country. That mix is really splendid. It is enthusiasm on the part of the students and a sense of learning, a willingness to try out ideas, an acceptance of the fact that the world is ultimately ambiguous and puzzling, a comforture with the notion that there aren't answers to questions. That kind of combination, students who engage their own minds and you as a teacher, that make you learn, that would count as the ideal students. I was asked not long ago what the secret of good teaching was by somebody who put that question semi-seriously, and I said it's having fun, it's enjoying yourself. That has to do not only with my own sense of satisfaction, but what I think students get out of the process. And the more I do it, the more fun I seem to have at doing it, and the more I discover myself learning what it is that I'm doing.
In particular, I studied the economies of Eastern Europe and Soviet Union, to a lesser extent, just developing countries. And I guess the reason I chose to look there is because I felt that one could learn something more about economics by looking at a system one didn't understand on an intuitive level. And it's a kick for me, I suppose, to feel that by studying these other systems, which look so superficially very different, one is struck by the similarity of economic problems across economies, across cultures, across levels of economic development. And one is also struck by the complexity of economic things. I think it's important. What I've learned from my whole experience is that there are no simple solutions. Things are very complex, and I think that's real important.
She was always very, very clear, and she somehow had a very good ability to relate to the students on a very personal level. And she was always very friendly with the students, and she made fast friends with the students, but not on a superficial level. I think she's a true friend, and students have no sort of reservations about going and speaking to her about problems that they have with the campus, with the department, with the class, and so on. At
Berkeley, I have had the opportunity to have close relations both with undergraduates and with graduate students, and I know many faculty members who say that teaching graduate students is the most rewarding part of teaching, and I guess I don't really adhere to that. I think you just get different things from the two different teaching experiences. From teaching undergraduates, particularly if you're teaching in a field of sort of policy relevance, you get a lot, sometimes you get very creative, original responses to things, which at a graduate level you don't get because people are much more interested in the intricacies of the discipline at that point, or discipline as discipline, and not the larger questions which the discipline is trying to answer.
She seems to have a very almost uncanny ability to bring out interests in people that perhaps are lying dormant or perhaps aren't manifest. And I think this is especially true in her larger lecture classes, in which students go in there without really knowing about the subject, without knowing, perhaps having a peripheral kind of knowledge and maybe a little interest, but she really tends to bring it out. And each lecture is very well structured and very interesting and exciting.
If I had to sum up what I've learned from teaching, in economics in particular, is that it's very important in a field which people think is complex or complicated beyond the comprehension of the ordinary person. The thing to try to emphasize is that that's not the case, that there's an intuitive nature to economics, and that if you can make people get to that, they become very enthusiastic. So I think what I've tried to do, and where I feel my greatest successes have been, is to try to make economic concepts clear and to make them interesting. And people do get interested. That's what I find, that people get really interested. And that's really very nice.
Well, I flunked pre-med at Harvard, and coincidentally, they were teaching an introductory course which, because a faculty person left unannounced, the total Harvard faculty team taught it. And it was just a very exciting thing. And I kind of got caught with it. And next thing I knew, I was an anthro major. That was way back in 1948. Then I went in the service for 5 years and grew up and came back as a junior and finished up in a blaze of speed, simply because by that time I was married and had, 3 kids by the time I got my bachelor's degree and 5 by the time I got my PhD, so there wasn't any time to waste. I'll be very honest, I'm an extrovert. I like being with lots of people, and it's fun when something catches and there's a real communication process that's going on. And to me, in fact, that's what teaching is. I guess I got initiated the hard way at Santa Barbara back in the glorious 60s when there was infinite amounts of money and enrollments were way up. I taught a course with 970 students in one lecture hall, 3 quarters in a row every year. And there's a corporate quality to a class that size. People don't think that's true, but indeed each class has a different personality, and you can in fact interact with the whole of the class as if it's one mega being, as well as 970 individuals. I get an honest, positive pleasure out of involving my students in my research. I'm not saying I'm co-opting what they're doing, but we approach a research problem as a group, and they get something out of it, and so do I. And so if I can do my research as a function of teaching, which I think is perfectly reasonable, I've always done it, then that's the best of all possible worlds, it seems to me, because both are happening at the same time. Like last summer on our new project back in the Virginia Tidewater, we had 14 Berkeley undergraduates and 4 graduate students, and we were working jointly on what is probably my main project right at the moment in archaeology, and we all had a share in it. And so far, a couple of undergraduate theses have come out of it, and I expect to see 2 or 3 PhDs. But it's still something I'm doing because I want to. And the students that I've enjoyed the most and who, over the years, have really turned into full human beings were those who realized that academia is an important part, but nonetheless only a part of living. And if you don't have something out beyond that, then somehow it ain't going to work. Well, to be very honest, I think the biggest chore we have before us right now is upgrading the quality of undergraduate teaching. Not that it's that bad, but with a distinguished faculty like we have here, and with all the resources, we're not doing the job that I think we should do. I applaud all of the efforts that are being made right now, and it's about time, toward upgrading the quality of undergraduate education, freshman seminars, small lower division courses. As far as my teaching is concerned, if work is defined as that which one does not like to do, I have not done a lick of work in 22 years. I think that's basically it, because it's too much fun. And I genuinely enjoy it. I plain like to do it, and so it's a cinch.
I started out, when I left high school and started at UCLA, I was going to major in mathematics. And then I discovered that there were a great many requirements in mathematics, including at that time, to be a math major, you had to take physics and chemistry. And while I'd rather enjoyed high school physics, I hated high school chemistry. And I had a friend who was already a student at UCLA who said, majors don't mean anything. Why don't you major in something that doesn't have a lot of requirements? You're interested in public affairs, he said, which was true. And why don't you major in political science? Two people stay in my memory as most important to me with respect to teaching. One was Abraham Kaplan in philosophy, who was just so brilliant and such a wonderful performer in class and meant a lot to me in those ways. And the other was William Hitchcock in history, who was just this magnificent discussion leader. And in that case in particular, I think I quite consciously have been striving ever since to lead discussions as well as he did, though I've not been able to match the standard. He had an ability to let everybody in the group feel that they were saying what was on their mind right then, never to feel stifled or excluded, and yet to make the discussion follow step by step some plan that he had in mind so that everything got covered and pulled together at the end. It was stunning. I bring my research concerns into the classroom. I don't know how I could keep them out of my teaching, and my students' responses push the development of my thought further. I think that my research would develop much more slowly and be much more dead if it wasn't fed by the teaching. Despite having gotten into political science, as I said, by accident and inertia, in fact, it turns out that I am very happy to be in this field, and that what matters to me about teaching is in some way reflected in or congruent with the subject matter of political science, and particularly of political theory, which of course is my specialty within political science. Because in the end, it's supposed to come back to the question, what should we do? And therefore suggests, the subject matter suggests a kind of interaction between, kind of connection between what you know about the world and your own capacity to make a difference, to intervene, to be creative, to take action, to make judgments, and to do those things together with other people, your fellow citizens. What should we do?
I was a math student at UCLA, and one of my courses was canceled, and in mathematics, and given that it was canceled, I had to find another one, and I took a course in electrical engineering, in programming, and because that course was available and I liked it, that was the beginning of my downfall. What I look for is students who are willing to work hard and then as smart as possible. And what I try and do in the courses is create a situation where if students are willing to work hard, they can get some interesting results, interesting not only to me and interesting to the student, but interesting to the people in the research community. So if they're willing to work hard enough, they can do something that I'm proud of and they're proud of too.
I have the impression that this award was mainly given because of his two more advanced courses that he started himself, 292X and Y, which are courses, I believe, really different from other courses. They are real research courses, and that's what distinguishes them from other courses. And you are somehow taught how to work in groups, in teams of students, to work on a real research project and produce real results, which are then published in papers. And in fact, the project on which we have been working is now one of the very well-known projects throughout the United States.
And I guess the most rewarding aspect of teaching is afterwards when they say, well, this class was a lot more work than I thought, but it was one of the best classes I've ever had, and I really learned a lot. that happens a lot in the undergraduate classes that I teach. It's a hardware course, and most of the computer science students want to do programming, which is the software side. And it's not unusual for them to say, well, I really didn't think I was going to like hardware, but they made me take the course, and I really enjoyed it. And that's a lot of fun. It's very satisfying.
His best virtue is his super enthusiasm. As you saw, it kind of flows out his body and into everyone around him. And he loves doing what he does.
When I graduated from UCLA, I went around, like most people, went on the grand tour interviewing a lot of places. And I was distressed that at many places, when they talked about teaching, is they really said, well, that's nothing for you to worry about, is teaching. It's something we don't care about. What you have to do is get the coin of the realm, the publications, and that's what's going to make your case. And I was disturbed about that, because that meant that I was going to be spending many hours of my life in front of a bunch of students, and if I didn't do a good job, I'd disappoint all the students, and if I did do a good job, then I'd disappoint the people I work for. But when I came to Berkeley, it was great. The computer science division, in particular the electrical engineering and computer science department, emphasized that they really did care about teaching. And it's true that it's a really exceptional group of teachers, and they really challenge you to do a good job, and they care about it.
The research, the collegiality, the sense of community at Berkeley, all that stuff matters, but I think the centerpiece of what it is that we are about is teaching, whether it be undergraduates or graduate students, individuals or large lecture classes. And it's not an activity that one hears lots about except from individual students in furtive and fugitive occasions. And to be told that you do that thing which the university is about very, very well is an extraordinary statement and a very nice confirmation of the vocation that I've chosen for myself.
Being a faculty member at Berkeley is wonderful. We have, I think, the best students in the country here, and this is a truly great and distinguished university. It's a privilege and a pleasure to teach here.